Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Connect Conference 2021 Day 4, brought to you by Huawei.
Good day everyone and welcome to this session on the Connect Conference 2021. So it's a great pleasure for us to invite our next speaker today to join us, Mr. Arthur Chen from Huawei. And he's a Chief Consultant and a Senior Solutions Director with Huawei. He's had a very varied career, working from an assistant engineer to a project management, into team leadership and the engineering side. He's also been on the side of business development and pre-sales. He's been as a sales director and also a GM in project management before, of course, becoming the chief consultant and senior solutions director for Huawei Technology since 2016. And a very interesting conversation we're having today. We've been talking a lot over the last couple of days about how technologies enable our economies. And today we're going to look at how fiber enables the digital economy and can become an enormous catalyst for economic growth. But of course, it's not without its challenges, and we need to also see how we can make it easier for companies to deploy fiber optic infrastructure. Mr. Chen's conversation today is going to look slightly differently, more on the inside plant side of deploying telecommunications infrastructure. So very welcome, Mr. Chen. Thank you very much for giving us some of your time, and we look forward to listening to you this morning.
Hello, everyone. Firstly, thanks to Anita and thanks for the Digital Council invitation. My name is Arthur. It's really my honor and pleasure to share the topic so-called policy for the indoor fiber wiring. As everyone knows that during the pandemic, the digital and the broadband service become critical. So in the next 30 minutes, I will do my best to share two topics. The first session, we will look into some of the so-called fiber pre-installation policies, and which are include the use cases and the best practice. And the second one, I will also talk about some of the reference of supportive policies which can accelerate the fiber rollout. Okay, so as we know that digital is quite important, and there is one saying which is my favorite, done by the Department of Economic and Social Affairs of UN. The new normal is digital. So why they say that? Simply because under the lockdown policies, I think not only the government, but also the enterprise, the persons, we have to keep our social activities over the internet. Specifically, the optical fiber become kind of a best medium to transmit the bandwidth, to provide the platform of the internet to connect to everyone, every entities, and so on. So it enables not only the digital society, but also become a elastic for the economic growth. As you see for these slides, it will reach and enable the digital industrialization and the industry digitalization in the near future in South Africa and the rest of the countries. And the other interesting trends in the housing industry is so-called smart. So here I summarize some of the major solutions happening in the developed countries and in the Asia-Pacific regions. Smart home, smart security, smart property management, and smart building safety, and so on. You can see that during the pandemic, some of the emerging innovative solution is coming into our life. So since it's very important to have optical fiber and enable the ultra-fast broadband services, but everyone knows that it's quite difficult to roll out the fiber. There are so many challenges occurred, not only from the view of a operator, but also the view from the other stakeholders. So typically, when we look into this diagram, it's very easy to understand, to figure out that we can divide it into two parts. Firstly, so-called outside plan. It's kind of a fiber rollout for the coverage. It's responsible for the operator and the ISP. And the other part is within the drawing. We can call it the inside plan. But for some reasons, it's not an uncertainty, or we can say there is no certain responsibility goes to the operators. So it becomes the very complex in between the coverage outside and the inside the house or inside the properties. So when we recall in the past decades, even in the South Africa, if you have a copper lines for the telephony, it is very easy for us to realize that in the past, all of the copper line has been deployed by state-owned telecommunication bureau or the kind of a public operator. So today, we are now urged the fiber rollouts will require the government intervention once again. So here we have one of a complicated and technical diagram, but please target on some of the highlight wording. It's very easy to understand that the circle in red just highlight the last mile is actually owned by, in most of the scenario, owned by the real estate developer, or we can call it property developers. So you can imagine that even the operator, they would like to expand their broadband service business. However, that will be one of the obstacles happening in between the coverage and the last mile. And the last mile, the solution for the last mile could be go to the other stakeholders, for instance, the property developers. So when we do the deep dive on the difficulties of fiber indoor installation, that will be a lot of challenges as well, coming from the residents, from the house owners. Imagine that when you have done a beautiful decoration, the interior decorations in your apartment or in your house, that you don't want to have any troubles to do any destruction on your decoration. You don't want to damage any furnitures or any things on your beautiful world. And on the other hand, we also observe that a lot of countries, there is no standardized wiring procedures for the optical fiber. So compound so much or so many obstacles, not only from the viewpoint of the operator, but also the residents. We also have interesting figures to tell. Nowadays, probably 80% of a real estate developers or the property developers, they don't want to spend the extra money to lay the fiber. However, the rest of 20, they are strongly willing for that because when they equip so-called FTTH fiber to the home, it is potentially can increase the price and the value of this property. When the operators want to do that, and the real estate developers want to participate in this game, they also occur some of the challenges, unexpected challenges. So we need a kind of synergies in between the public sector, operator, and public developers. So these last mile issues can be resolved by the intervention of the government. Here we can have an overview on the global policy and regulation for the fiber pre-deployment or provisions. So based on our study in the 2 years, we have seen over 10 countries has issued a policy or regulation for the fiber pre-provisioning inside the properties. And there are some of the features has been summarized at the right-hand side. Firstly, the mandatory requirements can be done. Second, we can also set up some of the implementation rules. Third, the other supportive policies, for instance, open access or kind of prohibition on the monopoly, it also will be very effective for push the fiber pre-installation in the future. And the last one will be regulatory mechanisms. So by such kind of features, we have seen the mutual, we will say the mutual agreed in between the countries. And that will be the purpose here we would like to promote. So we have selected some of the best practices and the use cases. The first one is from Singapore. When we look into these slides, it's not difficult for us to understand that the so-called COPIF, the Code of Practice for the Info Communication Facility in Buildings, such kind of the law, it can be updated by time by time. Start from the year 2000, there are 5-time updates for the entire so-called fiber provisioning policies. I have to say sorry that there is not in the sequence, but you can see the difference in between. A lot of standards or regulations can be done timely, simply because the requirement for the broadband services or the demands from the market is also diverse and changed by timing. So it gives us one of idea that firstly, don't be afraid to issue kind of regulation or policies, because we can update when the market has a demand over requirements. Secondly, by this COPIF, we can also see there are 6 features we can target or focus on: the space ready, pre-wiring, equipment room, access, maintenance, and the mobile facilities. So when we look into the other countries' policies, for instance, the France one, there are so many wording and a lot of detailed description to restrict or to mandate the property developers to do the fiber pre-installation. However, lots of things comparing between the Singaporean policies and the French one, that will be some of comments. Firstly, the mutual target is to realize the fiber radius in-house. Secondly, they would like to prevent from the mini monopoly of the ISP, the inside plant. So by different criteria, in France, they have a quite detailed definition by the size of the room and the amount of the rooms. For instance, one in the lower part, you can see that the 1 main room, 2 main rooms, and even you have more than 2 main rooms, that will be a different socket required by the regulations. Okay, so we can look into the other reference from China. In China, the China government, they took the different approaches by issue 3 major documents. Firstly, the code for design. It's very easy for us to understand that when one of a property developer want to build up the one buildings, they have to submit the blueprints and the proposals to the public sector for the work permit or construction permit. So at that moment, when the government set up the codes and the rules, the regulator can double check the blueprints whether they have considered about the fiber pre-provisioning. The second one is about the call for construction and acceptance. So when the blueprint has been proved and the property developers kick off the construction, sooner we need the audit and we need to do the final acceptance. In China, when the property, or we can say a building, has been new built, the government will submit some of the auditing to do the sampling test. If a layer is 10% of a sampling test, 100% passed for the fiber pre-installation, then they can get the certificate and the use license for entire properties. If not, the property developer will not have any license to commercialize these properties. That will be huge damage to the property business. So this is a very effective way when the government wants to audit the fiber pre-provisioning. The last one is happened in 2014. After 2 to 3 years, there will be some of the noises happen in the market. You can imagine that a lot of small-sized property developers, they will take a shortcut and do a very low quality of the fiber pre-installation for their properties. So how can we manage that or regulate? So China government, they issue kind of a cost reference. You can see all of the unit price, a kind of a reference for the unit price, which is relevant for the fiber pre-provisioning inside the buildings. So by 3 documents, the China has realized over 400 million household take-up rate within 7 years. And start from the 2013, all of a new built building has purely included the optical fibers, just like a copper lines and like the power cables. So it's also very interesting for your reference. The last part for the first station is about the dispute resolutions. You can imagine that there will be a lot of controversial issues happen in between the operator, the property developers, and the buyers or the property owners, okay, just like the residents or the companies. So we have seen that not only in China, but also in New Zealand, in Australia, the government also set up kind of entities to mitigate a lot of dispute, and to harmonize the entire market about the fiber pre-installation. So overall speaking, that it's not really difficult from our perspective to see or to promote the government to issue the fiber pre-installation policies. Okay, after the first sections, we go to the next one. The reference of the other supportive ideas. Firstly, I would like to appreciate there is one kind of so-called Operation Budindela. It's kind of, I think, policies. Sorry for the pronunciation. It just happened in South Africa. The government has had the presidency orders to set up one of a unit to handle and reform and implement all of a construction work within South Africa, including the digital. So this kind of a unit will be very, very effective if we can ensure their functionalities. At the right-hand side, I also share one of the reference from the UK, the United Kingdoms. There is so-called Barrier Busting Task Force, BBTF. This task force aims on resolve all of the obstacles and dispute in the market. By far, they have some of key achievements, and here I highlight three. Firstly, they have launched the digital connectivity portals. This portal provides a kind of overview not only to the officers but also to the residents, the citizens, which can be available to check the healthy conditions and the entire quality of the broadband connectivities. It's very beneficial to the end users and also very productive to the public sectors. Second one, they also passed the one of a so-called Telecommunication Infrastructure Act. This act regulates the leasehold properties, which means that for some of the property leased out, the owner of the property still be obligated to provide the ultra-fast broadband connectivities. The last one is reform of the EECC. It's kind of a, I won't say that, but it's kind of a, it's sort of a kind of a clone from the EU, the EECC code. This code is widely defined the entire broadband services and infrastructures. So by those three key achievements, we also can double check their priority areas. You can see that access to land, street walks, new build connectivity, and supporting mobile deployment. Lots of priority areas is just coincidentally matched with Singaporean government ones. So it's very interesting that when we look into the many use cases and the best practice of the policies and the codes, it will give us a clue to promote the brand new policies regulations to the governments everywhere. The last one will be 5 rules. The 5 rules of the team, the BBTF, they also educate the stakeholders to the collaboration between the other local governments. And the major mission of this team is to remove the barriers. So 3, 4, 5 information is just for reference for the entire operation within DELA. In person, I am very confident that in South Africa, the operation within DELA will have a huge success in the near future. The challenge will be how much time we have to realize it. Okay, the next topic is financial aid. Financial aid is always the one of the best way to stimulate the broadband rollout usages, particularly to promote the optical fiber rollouts. So as you see, we simply divide into 2 parts, the supply side and the demand side. There is no surprise that for some of the developed countries, for instance, the United States and the United Kingdom, and even the Greece, they already have paired policies to subsidize the optical fiber rollout in their motherland. When we look into the South Africa, we are great that the South African government has already have the subsidy plan to subsidize the supply side, or we can say the subsidiary for the coverage. In the near future, we are looking forward to having the other subsidy plan for the demand side. So what is the subsidy plan of the demand side? We can have a quick look on the use case of from the UK. In UK, they have quite structured the policies, which are designed for realizing the broadband universal services and the so-called gigabit connectivities. So if we look into the contents of these slides, why the government do that? Because they are committed to have a vision of the digital connected Britons. Today, they have a much ambitious visions, so-called Gigabit Connect or Gigabit UK. So what will be the policies. That will be the broadband universal services and the gigabit voucher scheme and or the rural gigabit vouchers. So by two approaches, the UK government, they would like to ensure the minimum broadband speed for all of the households. And on the other hand, they don't want all of the residents or all of the peoples in UK just satisfied of the minimum broadband speed. So they also give kind of a stimulus voucher to subsidize the 100 megabit, even the gigabit connectivities, which means that if you are a household owner and or you are the enterprise users, you can apply the public budget to have a kind of a discount to your tariff of a broadband, even have a so-called one-off installation fee discount. So both of policies is now speeding up the entire fiber rollout in UK. The last one I want to highlight is about the concerns of the public investment and the subsidies. Sometimes the people wonder, when the government pays the money which coming from the people's tax, is there any beneficial to the residents and to the industry, even to the nations? The answer is definitely yes. Here is the case from France. When we look into the past 5 to 6 years plan, the France government, they issued a national broadband plan, so-called THD. They plan to spend 43% of public investment to pool roughly 60% of private capitals. By the different policies to facilitate the broadband rollout, you can say that in urban area, the government just let it go. It could be fully compared by the operators. And in the suburban area, they have a so-called carrot and the stick rules, which means that they give some of a monopoly privilege to the large end operator, but they have to commit to do more to the entire broadband infrastructure. And the rural area is simply give the money to stimulate the local ISP or local stakeholders to participate the optical fiber rollout. After several years, here we have some of figures coming from the regulator of France. You can say that France is one of the most successful countries to speed up the fiber rollout by subsidiary in the world. By far, the FTTH coverage has 6-fold increase. And most importantly, the most of the capital or most of the expenditure coming from the private sector, not the public sector. So we can see that the public funds did pour a lot of investment, not only from operator, but also rest of the stakeholders. And it have a great outcome to the entire France, not only for the broadband, but also they have a number 2 e-public services in the world. The last reference of the policy I would like to share is about the protection of the physical infrastructure and the investment of the broadband. So nowadays in Africa, we have seen a lot of disasters happened by some of incidents or by some of criminals. So at last, we also promote so-called broadband infrastructure protection policies, which should encourage not only the federal or central government, but also local government can mandate or can do kind of approaches to prevent from the stealing, to kind of a rude civil work, or any kind of a cut-off on purpose over the optical fiber and the broadband infrastructures. So this is the last highlight we want to mention. So overall speaking, we have one of a slide for the takeaways. It's a little bit complicated to have the overview of entire fiber pre-provisioning policies and the reference of supportive policies as well. However, here we have 5 highlights. If the government would like to take off one of a plan or one of an action to strengthen their policies for the fiber rollout, they can consider about from the plan, from the design, from the engineering supervision, from the acceptance of all of the properties, and at last, to think about how to maintain and to operate the entire broadband infrastructures. So overall speaking, that the copper line in the past has been deployed by the public sector. Today, when we are now deal with the challenge of a pandemic, and we would like to have the boundary of the entire economies, the government can think about whether we can do some intervention on the market, not only for the operator, but also the rest of the stakeholder, for instance, the public developers, to make sure the new built building can have the optical fiber pre-installed. And in the near future, this kind of policy will speed up and increase the interest of the operator to do more investment on the optical fiber rollout. Thanks for your listening, and wish you have a pleasant days with digital councils. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chen. That was really informative. Thank you very much for coming on board to this Digital Council Africa conference. It's always a pleasure having you around and listening to you. And thank you again from all of us for sharing some knowledge and expertise on most efficient ways of deploying inside plant fiber optic infrastructure.
Ladies and gentlemen, we trust you enjoyed the session. Thank you to all our sponsors and partners for helping us bring this event to you. Please click on the next link to join the following session.